I would like to open my talk with the true story of a Syrian male refugee. As for so many others, his life became a nightmare in a bombing in which he lost everything he had, including one of his arms. Then he started his journey as a refugee, during which he has experienced a lot, including torture. He ended up in Greece almost 3 years ago, and since he has been waiting for his application for asylum to be considered. Recently, he was invited by the relevant asylum authority to a meeting in which he heard that his application has been set on ice. Why? He heard that the system demands fingerprints from both hands. This caused to our refugee a serious psychological breakdown, and he is now under police custody and heavy psychological support. Discussing innovation and technology, I may say that the good news is that there is already a humanitarian technology incubator, 3Dimena, which in cooperation with the NGO Refugee Openware uses 3D printing to create prosthetics for refugees who have lost limbs. The bad news is that there will always be a bureaucrat and a bureaucratic system that will destroy dreams and lives in an inhuman way. I'm using this example to say something that should be self-evident, that in a period of crisis, technology is indeed important, but the emphasis should be put on the innovation of our social, socio-cultural, and humanitarian performance. I have the privilege of opening a double session in which a lot of innovative ideas and projects will be presented and discussed. My main task is to set the background or the canvas for the discussion. But I would like to warn you, as I have studied innovation theoretically for some years now, and knowing that the common perception is that innovation is a kind of a panacea for all problems and challenges, and as it is, this is a special case, meaning that we're discussing technology and social innovation in a period of crisis. I'm obliged to say that particularly in such periods, innovating has some not so bright sides that have to be taken into consideration in our discussion. So in the next minutes, I will not speak about concrete technological or social innovations. And as I already mentioned, my task is to underline some of the obstacles to social innovation in a refugee crisis, some of the challenges we all face, and some of the traps we all may fall into. This session combines technology and social innovation, and this means that we may consider 3 different types of innovation. 1, technological innovations, which may be innovative devices or innovative applications. 2, technology-based social innovations, as for example, mobile learning, which we will discuss this afternoon. 3, social innovations that have no relation to technology, as for example, the case of Kukula, which will be presented to us in a moment. Since the escalation of forced migration in 2015, a number of technological innovations have appeared, mainly on applications that help refugees to overcome language barriers, match offer and demand, mainly in the areas of education and employment, or support the interaction between refugees and the public services. Unfortunately, the example of the Syrian man shows that there is a special kind of social innovation we need, probably the most difficult of all, what we could call mindset innovation. And thinking of the refugees and the migrants not as names on documents or number on lists, but as human beings is just one of the steps. A central thing we have to innovate in our mindset is our evaluation of what constitutes a crisis. Most of us tend to believe that a crisis appears when quantitative factors reach a peak. For example, when Lesbos receives 500,000 refugees in a few months. And yes, this is indeed a crisis. But as the time passes and we get used to the dramatic pictures, we tend to forget what happens just outside our door. We also have the tendency of evaluating the crisis according to the dramatic character of events and their coverage by the media. For example, When a child gets drowned in the Aegean or any other sea, this is absolutely a crisis. But when somebody freezes to death in a refugee camp, and without media coverage, this is not a crisis, this is just tragic. Please allow me to disagree on that. Dying from winter conditions in a refugee camp is a much deeper crisis. And this is why I believe that we are still in a period of crisis. One death constitutes a crisis. And this crisis, this exactly event, waiting for some more people to die in Moria this winter without doing almost anything, symbolizes the core of the crisis in its European dimension, the betrayal of what we like to call European cultural values. Another mindset element that has to be innovated is what I may call black or white mentality. After having talked to a lot of people from local and national authorities and organizations, members of NGOs, and representatives of local communities, I can argue that most of us tend to make absolute evaluations and speak in definite terms. Depending on whom you are talking with, the refugees are either good or bad, the NGOs are either a blessing or a curse, the locals are either heroes or xenophobic. These generalizations and the illogical enthusiasm or the general feeling of mistrust they create are probably the most difficult challenge we have to face. So, probably the most important social innovation is to use the most valuable piece of technology that exists on Earth, and this is our mind. But we have to use it critically, and we have to use it realistically. We have to accept that most refugees and migrants are victims of history who need our full support, but without closing our eyes to the fact that among them there are also dangerous, even criminal elements. We have to see that most NGOs and activists are indeed a blessing and are doing a job we should all be proud of, but without closing our eyes to the fact that there are NGOs and activists who have their own agenda and are indeed a curse for both the local communities and the refugees and the rest of NGOs. We have to admit that most of the locals have made us proud with the reaction to an unexpected crisis, but without closing our eyes to those few who we should be ashamed of, those who gained illegally and unethically from the crisis, or those who would throw the refugees back to the sea if they could. All these negative sides are minimal, and I would like to underline that. All these negative sides are minimal, but they are considerable enough, and they function as heavy obstacles to the needed interaction between the stakeholders, an interaction that will optimize the needed social innovations. Let us now turn from mindset innovation to social innovation. First of all, what is a social innovation? Well, we tend to say that a social innovation is a new idea or a new practice that answers social challenges by introducing considerable changes for those involved. Ideally, these changes should be to the better. Normally, the appearance of a crisis, any kind of crisis, sets the stage for innovation of various types, and this crisis has not been the exception. The last couple of years have witnessed a number of technological, social, and organizational innovations. But as I already mentioned, innovating in periods of crisis may demonstrate specific challenges. Some of these challenges are related to the short-termism that goes hand in hand with the crisis itself. What I'm saying is that during a period of crisis, what most stakeholders put their full energy on is exactly to answer acute needs and acute challenges. And this is, of course, right. The problem appears when this short-termism functions against thinking and working on long-term needs and long-term solutions. When it comes to technology-based innovations, a lot of times, if not most of the times, they are not tested with the users. And some of these innovative applications do not, never, reach the refugees. A lot of hackathons and other similar activities use or misuse a lot of resources to produce innovative apps which will never reach those they are supposed to have been designed for. Another problem is that some of these technology-based innovations are not taking into consideration legal and ethical challenges related, for example, to access to sensitive information and the ownership of it. A number of technological and social innovations are also fragmented. They answer to only small parts of huge problems. The reason for that is that they are designed and produced by innovators who suffer from a kind of tunnel vision. They focus so much on what they can contribute with that they are not able to place their contribution within the general framework of needs or to focus on the needs that should be prioritized. Another reason for the limited utility of such innovations is that they are what we may call identity innovations. That is, innovations that aim at the development or the maintenance of the identity of the innovator. In other words, these are innovations that are designed and produced or performed not mainly for the refugees and migrants, but for the companies and organizations who produce or perform them, and that to mainly maintain their own line of command and their own funding and existence. Last but not least, the last couple of years have witnessed a lack of coordination, which results in much overlapping and redundancy. You may, for example, think of how many applications are supposed to give information on the reception and integration of refugees in the very same place. I know, for example, that for Berlin, there exist some 5 or 6 of them doing more or less the same thing. Imagine the resources used for that. Let me now try to elaborate on some of these points. Point 1. One of the main challenges is the balance between voluntary enthusiasm and professionalism. Short-term innovation may indeed be, and probably should be, based on activism and voluntarism. But long-term innovation needs coherent organization, which I'm afraid is very limited in the world of activism and voluntarism. To reach long-term social innovation, both technology-based and analog, enthusiasm has to be paired to professionalism. Point 2, related to the reasons of overlapping and redundancy. Hacktivists and other activists should keep in mind that doing things from scratch is for sure much more fun, but often it has no impact at all. On the other hand, contributing to things already started by others and cooperating with established mainstream players is not that fun, but it may make a considerable change. Point 3. Sometimes innovating is anti-innovating or anti-innovative. Such a case you may have, for example, if you innovate incrementally in cases where radical innovations are needed. In other words, when you come up with small improvements when drastic changes are needed. Let me give you an example. In an innovation summit I attended a month ago or something, UNHCR presented the design and production of their most recent innovation, a mobile kitchen that will be placed in various camps. Some of them have been already placed. These mobile kitchens are containers 9 to 3 meters in dimension with 16 cooking and washing places, and they give the opportunity to refugee families to prepare their own meals. Is the mobile kitchen an innovation? Absolutely. Does it improve the lives of the refugees? No doubt. The question is it what we need? Or is it only what we need? Because improving the life in the camps, improving life conditions in the camps, without thinking that we have eventually to get away from this model of having camps in the first place, is anti-innovative. So I'm coming to my next point, where I would like to introduce a theoretical term, namely path dependence. Path dependence is the dependence on initial conditions, even if these conditions are no longer relevant. The idea is simple. Every decision we make opens a path which we start following. In our case, the refugee crisis, we open a path in a jungle, and the deeper you get into the jungle and the path, the more difficult it becomes to first realize that the path is wrong, if it is wrong, and second, to make the decision, the brave decision, that you have to sacrifice all the energy and all the resources used so far and try to open a new path. A very good example of path dependence is exactly the camps we still use to host refugees and migrants. They were probably an innovation when they were introduced some decades ago. At that time, they were indeed a solution, but I'm afraid that later, when they became the indisputable solution, in fact, they became part of the problem. Unfortunately, instead of innovating anew in a radical way, the involved and relevant authorities and organizations keep being focused on a model that produces modern concentration camps and arenas where a number of human rights are violated along with human dignity. But what should we do? To start with, an important point is related to the need of coordination of innovation. The symptoms have been presented already. A lot of enthusiasm for innovation exists out there, but it has to be channeled to the right directions and under the basic principle of synergy. Somebody has to undertake the very difficult task of registering the needs and coordinating the innovating efforts. A crucial question here is, of course, who could do so? We all know that we would not expect much from the national and international authorities. Probably the answer is to be found in the very often successful method of facing global challenges in local terms. This means that this could be done by institutions that have exactly that possibility of thinking globally and locally simultaneously. This means universities and research centers. A model may be the following. Regional or national universities take the initiative to establish innovation platforms to which they invite the municipalities of the area, representatives of the local innovators, for example, NGOs, companies, and others, as well as representatives of the refugees and the local societies or local civil society groups. These platforms will have a multiple task: to map the needs for innovation and possible funding resources, to coordinate innovating ideas and projects, to give their members an overview of innovations and innovation projects in other places, to be the contact point between grassroots initiatives and national and European authorities and funding sources, to support the composition of relevant applications. Here on Lesbos, such an initiative may be undertaken by the University of the Aegean, the municipality with the support of the regional authority, the chambers of commerce, and other stakeholders. An idea may be to establish a non-profit organization that may be called Innovation Lesbos or something like that. And I believe that Vasilis Sofiadelis' idea on establishing a tech hub on Lesbos is pointing to the right direction. Something very important, these incubators should not function only for the benefit of refugees and NGOs, but also to the benefit of everybody on the island. One of the central aims of such a coordinating platform should be the establishment of a better dialogue between all stakeholders, local, national, and international authorities, NGOs and other organizations, tech companies, host communities, and the refugees and migrants themselves. A point of crucial importance is related to the participation of the refugees and the migrants themselves in the innovating process. They could and should participate in at least two stages. One, those with a relevant background should participate in the design of social innovations, both technology-based and analog. Two, expert and non-expert refugees may participate in testing technological and technology-based innovations before the realization. When it comes to particularly social innovations, we cannot anymore think only of the refugees and the migrants. If we want to innovate in long terms, we have to include in the equation the host communities. And we have to include the locals in a double role. First, as participants in the innovation process, and second, as beneficiaries of the innovations along with the refugees. We have to innovate for the local communities as well. I would like to close my talk by saying that I'm looking forward to the following speakers and contributions. And as it is you, all of you, who have the experience of the needs and the gaps, I am also looking forward to our hopefully very fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.